Hey, soccer fans, welcome back to Feed the Fire, a Chicago Fire and MLS podcast. I am your host, Nick, and I wanted to get a quick episode out previewing the Chicago Fire's next matchup, a road trip up north to Toronto FC. We're going to take a look at Toronto's roster, how they've been this season, and we'll give our predictions for the match. Also, there's a little bit of news from around Chicago politics that may have a trickle-down effect into the Chicago Fire's new stadium. Some interesting new legal developments there. Nothing crazy, but something fun to take a look at, and we'll get to that at the end of the show. I want to remind everyone that our show is sponsored by Skira Icelandic Spring Water. Skira is Icelandic for clear, and the water comes from a government-protected nature preserve in Iceland. It is some of the best water that you will find. It is available at your local 7-Eleven. Grab a few bottles, stay hydrated, and now let's get into our preview. So the Chicago Fire are heading north this weekend on Saturday, March 15th, to take on Toronto FC, an FC team that's a little bit in flux, and one that, let's be frank, the Chicago Fire should beat. This should be a win for them. Now, they should have beat that DC team too, and that seems to be a trend with the Fire struggling with lower opponents and then sometimes playing up to the level of the better opponents. But we'll see how things go under Bob Bradley. We've only had a 3-game sample size thus far this season. Looking at Toronto's roster, they have made some additions that help bolster their attack and their defense. Looking at their attack, they added forward Thiago Andrade in a trade from San Diego, forward Theo Corbenau on loan from Granada, forward Ola Brynhildsen on loan from FC Midland, as well as midfielder Marcus Simmermanchik, a homegrown player that they signed. Defensively, they have added Zane Monluis and Lazar Stefanovic. Monluis, a transfer from Arsenal, and Stefanovic, a homegrown. They've also added goalkeeper Adisa de Rosario, another homegrown. I wonder if that is Dwayne de Rosario's son, one of his sons. I know they all play soccer. I'll have to look that up at a later date, but that doesn't surprise me at all if that would be MLS legend Dwayne de Rosario's son playing now for TFC. They did lose a few players, some names that we saw, and this is interesting. They transferred out Thiago Andrade to Cerezo Osaka, and then it looks like he got picked up by San Diego and traded back. So an odd bit of MLS business there. They also declined to pick up options on most of their players, including defenders Ima Mabika, Shane O'Neill, Luke Singh, and loaned out Adam Perlman to Halifax Wanderers. Goalkeeper Greg Ranjit Singh had his option declined. Midfielder Brandon Servania had his option declined. And Prince Owusu had his option declined as well. So clearly they are moving in a different direction with their players and talent under new head coach Robin Fraser. Now, looking at Toronto's run of form over these first 3 matches, they have opened the season a 2-2 draw at DC, a 4-2 defeat at Orlando, and a 2-0 defeat at Cincinnati. So they have 2 losses and a draw on the season, but 3 away games. They will be happy to be back at home. They're debuting their new red jersey, the Red of All Reds kit, as they're calling it. They are honoring a lot of different players coming back. So this should be at least an emotional swell for TFC as they go into this match against Chicago. But how will they line up? In their last match against Cincinnati, they lined up in a typical 4-3-3 formation. Goalkeeper Sean Johnson got the start for them, and Fire fans, we know Sean Johnson well with his history from our club. And going back from left to right, they had Nixon Gomes, Kevin Long, Zane Monluis, and Cozy Thompson as their defensive line. In their midfield, they have Matty Longstaff, Daibi Flores, and Jonathan Osorio, the always dangerous Jonathan Osorio. He's someone to keep an eye on when they begin a counterattack. Their attacking line was Tyrese Spencer, Federico Bernadeschi, and Ola Brynhildsen. So working in some of these new players right away on their line. Coming off the bench, they have defenders, Derek Etienne Jr. He's been, one of my favorite MLS players to watch. He's been all over, a bit of a journeyman, but a guy that tends to fit in wherever he goes. They also have Luka Gavran, DeAndre Kerr, a striker who can come off the bench and make things happen. Kobe Franklin, Marcus Simmermanchik, Lazar Stefanovic, Alonzo Soello, Theo Corbenau, and also I think that's Ryan Fisher to round out the bench. Robin Fraser again as their manager. So they do have some options. In their last match, they brought in Stefanovic, Kerr, Etienne Jr., Corbineau, Coelho, guys who can try to bring a little bit more of an attack mindedness to the formation. So that's something to keep a lookout. If this is a close game, look for a kind of a mass second half substitution where they just transition from their original tactics into a more attack minded team. Now, being that this is their first home game of the season, will they try to start off on the front foot? Will we see maybe DeAndre Kerr get a start? Will we see Derek Etienne Jr. get a start and try and have them play a little bit more on the front foot? That's something that we could see, but it remains to be determined given the lineups and given any potential injury reports, which I keep going on MLSsoccer.com and try and pull it up, and the last one I can find is from February 21st. So if anyone's got the link to the updated injury reports and player availability reports other than looking for local broadcasters, please let me know. You can email me, glasshouseSoccer@gmail.com, and you can find me on social media at GlassHouseSoccer. I do think this is a close game, and because of Toronto's early struggles, and I think Chicago isn't one of those teams that shies away from a road challenge. Maybe I'm reading into that too much. I really don't have much evidence under Greg Berhalter for that, but this is a resilient Chicago team. I can say that. And depending on our player availability, I do think Chicago ends up with the victory on this one. Some of the players that have been out are getting healthy, are back in training. So I'm sure a few of them will be kind of game time decisions. So keep a lookout on all the social media reports, Men in Red 97 Media, Joe Chats at On Tap Sportsnet. Keep a lookout for those reporters who are going to be getting you lineup notes and injury notes as we approach kickoff. But I still think the Chicago Fire have the offense on this one that can kind of overpower the Toronto defense. We've seen them already give up a number of goals this season, and I do think the Chicago Fire end up with a nice 2-1 victory in Toronto. Let's not just put together a point streak, which they have, 4 points, but let's put together a win streak here in Chicago. I also really want to quickly, yeah, it's early. It's definitely early. I need to get some coffee in me. I want to quickly recognize an email I got from Tom out in Geneva, who wanted to comment on our last episode where I kind of gave a breakdown on Chris Brady and some of the tendencies we're seeing in this early season, looked at some of his advanced metrics. So if you like that sort of thing, if you want to hear more about a Chris Brady breakdown, go back and find our last episode. He says, I was especially pleased to hear a variety of thoughts on Chris Brady on the show. I think he's an extraordinary shot blocker and a much better keeper than Gaga Slonina was or is. Not even close. I think he has what it takes to be elite. However, I think he needs to develop two aspects of his game. One, his positioning, which Tom calls pretty pedestrian, and his judgment, which Tom calls just okay. Seems like the goals he gives up tend to be when he is out of position, like the last second goal versus DC, which, Tom, I'll give Brady a little grace on that. That was one of those odd looping, curling ones towards the far post, and I think the keeper's responsibilities have to be towards the near post when the ball is on that side of the field and kind of towards the corner of the box. I don't know how much I can put on Brady for being out of position on that one. But as you know, a goal is not one person's fault alone most of the time. It is a combination of defenders being out of position, goalies making perhaps not the best read or the best positioning themselves, and a few other breakdowns. But yeah, that one to me, I'll give Brady a little grace on. But generally speaking, I agree with you on the points. Also, Tom goes on to say, Brady's judgment is best illustrated by his pass to Orahel in Columbus that resulted in a goal that was a killer. That's that first one. Now you can have a shout for a foul that Orahel was fouled, but Brady does need to learn, if you are going to play out of the back, which a lot of teams around the world are doing now, that you have to make those reads and that you have to launch the ball. We also know that Greg Berhalter is going to be okay with his team making mistakes early on as they learn his new system, and they learn that. We've seen that in his experiences with the USMNT. And an early loss to Columbus probably isn't going to affect the Chicago Fire's standings at the end of the season. An early loss to Columbus in Columbus, especially. So I think Berhalter is okay with that trade-off, and to a certain extent, I am too. But the one thing we did find out when looking at Brady's advanced stats through 3 games was that he is not launching the ball far downfield. And by launching it, they say anything over 40 yards. So he is playing it out of the back a lot more, and he has to learn when can he do that and when does he just need to launch it. All right, what else does Tom go on to say? He says, I hope Triple G sits him every once in a while, his development will be great. Will be a great little stadium news here. This is something interesting that actually came out early in February, but I'm just seeing it now. So hopefully, I'm not the last one to hear this. But all the different news outlets are covering it, from NBC to Fox to even Illinois Policy has an article about it. It has to do with a new law in Illinois tied to stadium funding, and there's a proposal that stadium funding gets tied to on-field performance. So let me read you the article from NBC5 Chicago, and then we can maybe chime in with some thoughts here. It says sports teams seeking funding for new stadiums in Illinois would have to win to get paid under terms of a newly proposed bill. The Bears Act, BEARS, the Bears Act, which stands for Balanced Earnings and Record Standards, was introduced by State Rep Bob Morgan, and it would require teams to win a majority of their games over a 5-year period in order to be eligible to receive public funding for stadium projects, whether they are newly constructed homes or renovations of existing stadiums. Quote, our primary goal with this bill is not to punish teams, but to ensure that Illinois taxpayer dollars are spent responsibly. No one wants to see taxpayer dollars wasted by billionaire team owners that are not investing in their team's competitiveness. As families across Illinois are tightening their belts due to the rising cost of living, we must be careful with how we spend limited public dollars, especially when it comes to billion-dollar franchises, end quote. And that was State Rep Bob Morgan who introduced the bill. So under the provisions of the bill, teams would be required to achieve a record of 500 or better in 3 out of 5 seasons in order to qualify for any sort of public financing of any stadium construction or renovation project. The introduced bill comes as multiple Chicago teams eye funding for new stadium projects. That group includes the White Sox, who have been trying to drum up funding for a ballpark to be built at the 78. Their lease at Rate Field, a ballpark built with public funding, expires later this decade. The Bears are also looking to replace Soldier Field and would seek public funding as part of the process. The team's lease at Soldier Field expires in 2033, with the team's preference to build a new stadium just south of the existing stadium. Projects have encountered resistance from lawmakers. And in the press release about the Bears Act, Rep. Morgan cited numerous studies that have questioned the economic value of new stadium projects. There's a few other notes about the records of these teams, and it shows that pretty much, the Bears and the White Sox would not qualify if this bill passes because they don't have enough winning seasons. So something really interesting that's going on. I don't know. Like, I appreciate the sentiment here, and I think it's kind of fun to tie new stadiums to winning. It is a little bit of a carrot and a stick type of thing for these team owners, or as they call them in the article, the billionaire franchise owners. I don't know if I agree in principle that you should tie these things to winning, because we've seen that with our very own Chicago Fire. They get a brand spanking new training facility, which will help them get better and eventually start winning. So you kind of run into a bit of a catch-22 or chicken and egg scenario here. What comes first, the winning or the better facilities? However, I really do think that the Sox and the Bears have kind of screwed themselves on this one, just because they are they don't own their own stadiums. And if you want wealth, and if you're looking at it from a purely economic perspective, then you need to own your own stuff. That's how you are a wealthy franchise and wealthy organization. That is how every NFL team has increased their value over the last several decades, by building their own new stadiums themselves and owning it. And whether they get public funding or not, at least they're not beholden to, say, the Park District or some other government agency that leases them stadiums. And that's why I think it's very interesting to see how this all shakes out. And if we hear any more commentary from Illinois politicians or residents or taxpayers on the fact that the Fire and owner Joe Mansueto would be willing to fund their own stadium without any public dollars and probably get the first pick of locations. So with that, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Quick episode today. I hope we can get a result in Toronto at least. Hopefully we do get that win, like I said, a 2-1 victory. Please help the show out. Share the link, share the show, like, subscribe, rate, review, do all those great things that help us move on up in the algorithms here out online, so that way we can bring Feed the Fire and more MLS content to more and more soccer fans and casual fans getting into the sport. And with that, as always, we say here, let's go Fire.